This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Nigel Ralph. I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of South Australia, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all this evening on behalf of the University of South Australia and the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre at the University of South Australia. Distinguished guests, friends of the University of South Australia, ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in welcoming Dr. David Suzuki.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I thought he was going to use up all my time here to speak. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that this is the traditional territory of the Kaurna people who've lived here and cared for the land for thousands of years. I'm delighted to say that one of the first names that I ever received was from Uncle Lewis O'Brien when I made my first visit here to Adelaide, and I'm very, very proud of it. And I was astounded that he's still alive and around. I hope I get to see him before I leave here. Thank you for the opportunity to visit Adelaide and South Australia again, and to see that Mike Rand's work that he began when he was Premier in converting or establishing a big renewable energy presence has continued on. Ian Hunter told me about this yesterday, and I'm astounded. I think South Australians ought to be proudly announcing to the world what you've been able to do in terms of meeting the challenge of climate change through renewable energy. Tomorrow I'm going to go and visit Suzuki Forest. I'll bet none of you even knew about Suzuki Forest, which Mike Rand started. It was degraded land, and it's been replanted with trees, and I'm going to go out and see what happened. And apparently, my forest is right next to Schwarzenegger Forest. So we'll see who's bigger. So I have... My wife and I have been delighted to return to Adelaide. I must admit, I found it very distressing to learn that BP has been granted a permit to drill for oil in the deep water of the great Australian Bight. Thanks for that information, by the way, and to endanger the wildlife area that you have there, and of course. A spill there would be absolutely catastrophic. So I hope that people here leave and you become involved in making sure that that does not happen in the coming years. But let me say that I'm here today to speak not as an expert, as Nigel described in any way. I'm not here to speak on behalf of any organization or group, any political party or corporation. I'm here to speak primarily as a grandfather and as an elder. And it's the elder part that's very important to me, because I believe now that I'm in the death zone, and I think when you're 80, you know damn well that the end is in sight. I've been thinking a great deal of the life I've led. I believe this is the most important period in my life. You see, as an elder, I no longer have to play games in order to get a job or a promotion or a raise. I can speak the truth from my heart, and if that offends people, that's their problem, not mine. As elders, we are no longer driven by the need for more fame or money or power or sex. Well, I know some elders do. They need help. They've got problems. But most of us are beyond that. And elders have something no other group in society has. We've lived an entire life. We've made mistakes. We've suffered failures. We've celebrated successes. We've learned a lot. Those have been hard-won life lessons. And I believe that as an elder, it's my job, it's my responsibility now, as all elders should, to sift through that lifetime of experience for those hard-won lessons to pass on to coming generations. And that's the role that I'd like to perform tonight. You see, we are at an absolutely critical moment in all of history, in the history not just of our species, but of all life on Earth. We have become so powerful. Our numbers are now so great. We are the most numerous mammal on the planet. We have developed technology that has amplified our muscle power to travel to every nook and cranny on the planet in search of resources. We have a consumptive appetite that is absolutely phenomenal now, and we have a global economy that utilizes the entire planet as a source of raw materials and dumps its wastes in the entire world. And when you add all of that together, our numbers, our technology, our consumption, and our global economy, we have become an unprecedented force on the planet. A force that scientists have now recognized by calling this moment in Earth time the Anthropocene epoch. A period in geological time when our species is now the major factor shaping the biological, the chemical, and the physical properties of the planet on a geological scale. But as you face the prospect of drilling for oil off your shores, as a prospect of possibly using your great land here as a dumping ground for nuclear waste, we are creating massive problems that we have no idea of the long-term impact of what we are doing. You know, we dropped nuclear bombs on Japan to end the war. It was only years later that we discovered there was a thing called radioactive fallout. We gave the Nobel Prize for the discovery that DDT kills insects, and only discovered a decade later that in nature, biomagnification concentrates DDT in the shell glands of birds and in the breasts of women. We used millions of pounds of CFCs only to discover that we were creating holes in the ozone layer. And now we are proposing to use genetic engineering to tamper with the very essence of who we and who other life forms are, and geoengineering because we've created such a mess with climate change that we feel we've got no choice but to begin to take over the planet and engineer the climate itself. This is a form of madness, it seems to me. It's hubris on a scale never before witnessed. And that hubris and that belief in how smart we are is undermining the very things that keep us alive. What we do or do not do in the coming years will determine whether we as a species survive. Now that's a pretty melodramatic statement to say our species could very well go extinct as a result of what we are doing. But that's not me that's saying that. Consider some of the experts. Consider Sir Martin Rees, the royal astronomer in Britain, who was asked on BBC, what are the chances humans will be around by the year 2100? And his answer sent a chill up my back, 50-50. So James Lovelock, the man who invented the idea of Gaia, the collective name for all life on Earth, has written a book in which he says by the end of this century, 90% of humanity will be gone. And your own eco-philosopher, Clive Hamilton, has written a book called Requiem for a Species. And I've read the book from cover to cover. There's nothing I disagree with there. Guess who the Requiem is for? It's for us. And now Guy McPherson, a retired professor of ecology in Arizona, is going around the world claiming that our species will be extinct within decades. How did we arrive at this terrible moment in time. So I'm a geneticist by training, and I've been amazed at how scientists can use DNA to trace the movement of our species over time. And all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. I can't wait for the Ku Klux Klan to invite me to give a lecture so I can tell them, what the hell's your problem? We're all Africans, for God's sakes. We were born in Africa. We were not a very impressive animal when you think of the herds of animals that existed in the plains where we were born. We weren't very big, there weren't many of us, we weren't fast or strong. Our secret of success, of course, was that 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls. It was the human brain that gave us a leg up and compensated for our lack of physical and sensory prowess. The brain conferred a great curiosity. We were curious about the world around. We were inventive, and we had a vast memory. We remembered what we learned through trial and error, through observation. The great Nobel Prize-winning geneticist Francois Jacob once said that the human brain has an inbuilt need for order. And what he's saying is we don't like it when things are happening around that we don't understand, that it's all chaotic. And so there's an instinctive response to that need for order. We make sense of things within what anthropologists call a worldview. So we're constantly constructing a way of seeing the world. The African plains were our home, and we were very successful at making a living on the African plains. But at some point, we began to move. We don't really know why we began to move. Possibly the success of our species was we increased our population. Possibly we began to deplete resources that we needed. I personally think it was teenage boys that were looking for action with the Neanderthal women on the other side of the mountain, because we did breed with Neanderthals. But whatever the reason, we began to move off the plains of Africa. And as we moved into new ecosystems, we were an invasive species. We didn't know how the system worked. You know, we just came into new areas. Wow, there are all these birds without wings. They're easy to catch and they're good to eat. We began, and you can follow now, a wave of extinction of other species as we began to move across the planet. So even with simple tools like stone axes and spears and digging sticks, we were a very effective predator as we spread across the planet. As we established ourselves in new ecosystems, no doubt we began to find, hey, those birds we used to get so readily, there aren't many left. Or those mammals, or those plants that we use, they're disappearing. So again, we found ourselves with a dilemma. We're running out of stuff, and so we had two choices. You move, or you stay and you live in a different way. And I believe the roots of indigenous cultures around the world rest with those who stayed in place and said, this is our home, and we've got to learn from the mistakes that we made in the past. In oral traditions, you pass on those hard-won lessons, as I indicated, I, as an elder, am trying to pass on to my children and my grandchildren. So over thousands of years, indigenous culture was the accumulated knowledge through the hard-won lessons that their ancestors had gained. And they're profoundly linked to place. But it was around over 500 years ago that we saw, well, I should say all over the world, those indigenous cultures understood our place in nature. Indeed, most of them refer to the earth as our mother. And they don't mean that in a metaphoric or a poetic way. When people refer to Mother Earth, they mean it literally, that we are created out of the elements of the earth. And that's been the understanding and the perspective of people since way, way back for most of human existence. But that began to change some 5 centuries ago in that great age of exploration and exploitation and colonization. And my family are a part of that whole process. My grandparents left Japan between 1902 and 1906. They were poor, they were uneducated, and they left. They knew they would never go back to Japan. It was a one-way trip. There was no Skype or jet planes or telephones back then. They knew they were going away forever from Japan. But they came to Canada because they believed there was opportunity. If they worked hard, they could gain a foothold in this new country. They knew nothing of the indigenous people in the country they arrived in, and so they learned nothing from them. My parents were born and raised in Canada. Dad was born in Vancouver in 1909, my mother in Vancouver in 1911. And like all of the other children of those new immigrants, the Japanese Canadian kids, they grew up without grandparents or elders who were all still back in Japan. So they grew up rootless. They had no roots in Canada. They only knew what their parents had come over for, which was opportunity. They wanted a chance. And they, when I grew up, my grandparents had learned no English. They didn't learn English at all. I never learned Japanese. I never had a conversation with my grandparents. So you can see the rootlessness that developed with this new wave of immigration. To my parents, they grew up believing you've got to work hard, you have to earn money, you have to buy land. Land was your opportunity. If there were trees on it, cut them down and sell them. If there were fish in it, catch them and sell them. If there was good topsoil, you grow vegetables and sell them. If there were minerals underneath, you dug them out and sold them. Land represented opportunity. So that, I believe, those are the roots of who I am, and for many, many people in these new lands from Africa, South America, North America, Australia, and so on. And what I realize now is that the way that we look out at the world, at the land, influences, indeed shapes the way we treat that land or what we see in the world around. And I came to understand that many years ago when I visited a small village in the Andes Mountains in Peru. And I learned there that the children are taught that the mountain that the village is on is an apu. Apu in their language means a god. And as long as that apu casts its shadow on the village, it will determine the destiny of everyone in that village. So you can imagine how those kids, when they grow up, treat that mountain. Compared to, say, a kid that grows up in the Rocky Mountains of British Columbia, who's taught all their lives, those mountains are full of gold and silver. The way we see the world shapes the way that we treat it. Human beings are predators. That's the way we are. We have to eat plants and animals to survive. We have to clear land to build our shelters. We have to use plants and animals for our clothing. But the way that we exploit nature is influenced by what we believe is our place in nature. When a forest is a sacred grove, we will extract lumber and pulp with reverence. When a river is seen as a circulatory system of the land, we will irrigate or recover power without disrupting the basic function of that river. When soil is seen as a complex community of organisms, we no longer treat it as dirt. When other species are recognized as our biological kin, sharing with us thousands of genes identical to our genes, then we will treat them as we do our biological relatives. When a house is our home, it's not real estate, a starter home or a tear down. we treat it very differently. When the planet is our mother, well, then we ask, would we treat our biological mother the way we treat Mother Earth? The way we see the world influences the way we behave and act. I spent 8 years in the United States getting an education that wasn't possible in Canada at that time. That was during the 1950s. And I returned to Canada in 1962, and I was determined I was going to be a hotshot geneticist. I had a great education in the United States, and I was totally sidelined by a woman. That's happened to me all my life, but most of the time disastrously. But in this case, I'm ever grateful to her. My greatest regret is that I never met her in person. But in 1962, a woman named Rachel Carson published a book called Silent Spring, all about the effects of pesticides. And as a scientist, I was absolutely shocked when I read that book. As a scientist, I realized that in nature, everything is connected to everything else. Scientists look at the world in fragments, in concentrated bits and pieces. But what she was telling us is, when you spray chemicals on a farmer's field to kill insects, since everything is connected, you end up affecting fish and birds and human beings. Let me show you what the implications of that recognition are. I mean, it's so obvious now. I think most of us that are aware of environmentalism understand that. But back then, we looked at the world in a fragmented way, and the implications of seeing the world that way are immense. Let me tell you a really fascinating story. For years, biologists wondered at the productivity of a thin band of land that extended from Alaska to Northern California. It was a temperate rainforest pinched between the Pacific Ocean and the coastal mountains. And that temperate rainforest has the highest biomass, weight of living things, of any ecosystem on the planet. And the reason is the trees are very, very big. But the question for biologists was, how can you get such big trees when there's so little nutrient in the soil, especially nitrogen? It rains a lot. It's a rainforest. And the rain washes the nutrients out of the soil, and the soil is nitrogen deficient. How can you grow trees on nitrogen deficient soil? And the answer turned out to be the salmon. Up and down the coast, there are thousands and thousands of rivers and creeks, each with their own specific runs of salmon. We have 5 species of salmon in the Pacific coast. They live between 2 and 5 years. They're born in rivers and creeks all up and down the coast in fresh water. They go to sea, and then after 2 to 5 years, they return back to the very rivers and streams that they were born in. What's been found is that most of the nitrogen on land is the normal isotope of nitrogen called nitrogen-14. In the ocean, there's a much higher proportion of nitrogen-15. It's a heavier isotope of the land nitrogen. So you can tell the difference between these two isotopes with instruments. So the salmon go to sea as babies. They load up on nitrogen-15 from the ocean by eating the ocean food, and then they return 2 to 5 years later to their natal streams. And when they come back, everybody celebrates. The whales and the seals are all eating them as they're coming in to the estuaries. And then as they go up the river, the sound of birds is incredible because they're all feeding on the eggs and on the salmon. But 3 of the major predators of the salmon as they come back to spawn are eagles, wolves, and bears. The bear is a most important predator of the salmon. They tend to be solitary animals, But during the salmon season, they will come and fish in the same pool. You might see 6 to 10 bears all feeding on salmon at one time. But when they catch a salmon, they then hike into the forest up to 150 meters away where they'll eat the salmon by themselves. They eat the best parts of the salmon. Of course, you know that's the brain, the belly, and the eggs. And then they dump the rest of the carcass and they go back for more. I mean, why eat the whole thing when you don't have to? And right away, there are salamanders and ravens and all kinds of other things that are eating the salmon. And everybody is pooping and peeing in the woods. And that's all spreading nitrogen-15 from the salmon that they've consumed. The major eater of the salmon carcasses that the bears leave are flies. So if you see a carcass that's been lying there for 3 or 4 days, it will be a seething mass of maggots all eating up that flesh. They then drop to the forest floor and overwinter. And in the spring, trillions of flies loaded with nitrogen-15 from the ocean emerge from the floor of the forest at the very time that birds from South America are flying through on their way to the Arctic. And it's all perfectly timed that those flies are now feeding the birds on their way up. Of course, the trees are being fed by all of the poop and pee. You can take a core of a tree and pull out a core from the tree and look at the rings. And there are fat rings and skinny rings. And the fat rings, when you measure nitrogen-15, they're loaded. And the skinny rings, very little nitrogen in them. And then you can look at the records and show that the fat rings with lots of nitrogen-15 are when there were big runs of salmon. So the salmon are literally feeding the trees. When the salmon die in the river, rather than being eaten by other things, they sink to the bottom of the river, and within a few weeks, they're just covered in fungus and bacteria, and are eaten up by microorganisms, which are eaten by copepods and insects, and so on. So when the baby salmon emerge from the gravel 4 months later, the river is filled with food coming from the carcasses of their parents. So the babies then get a shot at having a big feast before they make their way out to the ocean. So you see this beautiful system where the oceans, the rivers and the land, the north and southern hemisphere are all linked together in the way Rachel Carson explained to me. Now humans come along and we go, oh, wow, look at all these resources. Look at the salmon. Well, the salmon, that's the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for the commercial fishers. Oh, but what about those native people? Okay, that's the Department of Indian Affairs. You deal with that. But there are a lot of sport fishermen. Oh, that's the Department of Tourism. So the salmon are divvied up into different ministries. And then, of course, there are the trees. Well, that's the Department of Forestry. And what about the river? Well, that's the Department of Energy and the Department of Agriculture. And then there are the eagles and the bears. And well, that's the Department of the Environment. So what is a single, elegantly, exquisitely interconnected system, through human eyes, are divided up and fragmented. And then we claim that we're going to manage the system. It's absolutely absurd. We will never be able to manage such a system as when we see it in such a fragmented way. So that to me is an illustration of what Rachel Carson was telling us in her book. This is in 1962 her book came out. There wasn't a single department of the environment in any government in the world when her book came out. The word environment simply didn't mean in 1962 what it means today to us. But like millions of people around the world, because of her book, I was swept up in what we now know is the modern environmental movement. And the results of that great movement were huge. In only 10 years, in 1972, we had the first global environment meeting in Stockholm. In 10 years, the United Nations established UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, and governments around the world began to establish ministries, portfolios, committees on the environment at all levels of government, and we got laws passed to protect air and water and endangered species. We had millions of hectares of land around the world were set aside as parks and reserves. Those were great achievements of that environmental movement. And in British Columbia, where Tara and I were involved in environmental issues, we celebrated many victories. The Americans proposed to bring supertankers of oil from the north slopes of Alaska down through British Columbia waters to be refined in Seattle, and we stopped it. There was a proposal to drill for oil in very sensitive areas like Hecate Strait off the coast of BC or in the Arctic, and we stopped those. We stopped a dam that was going to be built on the Peace River at Site C. And Tara was very, very involved in raising money to help the Kayapo people in Brazil stop a major dam on the Xingu River in Altamira. Those were all great celebrations of victories that we had. But guess what? 30 to 35 years later, we're fighting the same battles all over again. Those were not victories because we as environmentalists failed to use those battles as moments to educate people, to get them to see their relationship to the world in a different way. We didn't shift the paradigm. We're still stuck in the old way of looking at things. When people ask me, and young people especially often ask me, they say, David, what is the most important issue? Is it climate change or what about acidification of the oceans? What about toxic pollution? What about the vanishing forests of the planet? Which one is what about species going extinct? Which one is the most critical one? And I tell them, look, I have no idea which one may be the ultimate one to trigger our demise. They're all very, very serious issues. But underlying all of them is the human mind that is driving us in the direction we're going. And I believe that in the end, the challenge is to shift the mind in terms of the way we see the world. Let me tell you what I mean when I say that. 3 years ago, you all know, I'm sure, of the battles that we're having in Canada over the Alberta tar sands. And 3 years ago, I got a call from the CEO of one of the largest companies mining the tar sands for oil. And he said, could I come and talk to you? I was delighted. I said, yes, absolutely. I said, I'm done with fighting. Because whenever there's a fight, there's a winner and there's a loser, and we can't afford to have losers anymore. Please come down and talk to me. He came down the next day, and he came to the door, and I told him how honored I was. I was thrilled that he would take the time to come and see me, and thanked him profusely. And then I said, but before you come through the door, please do me the favor of leaving your identity as the CEO of a company outside the door. I want you to come into my office as a human being, and I want to meet you human to human. Because, Mr. CEO, I don't want to fight. I don't want to negotiate. I want to find out what is our common ground. What do we agree on as the most fundamental needs? We need to have a foundation of agreement, and then we can begin to discuss how we make a living and how we live on the planet. Well, I have to say he wasn't very happy about that. He did, to his credit, he came through the door, and I told him as he came into my office, I said, I know this is not what you expected, and it may be difficult for you, but let me explain what I'm trying to say. So this is what I said to him. I said, we live in a world that is shaped and constrained by laws of nature. And these laws are fixed. We can't do anything about them. We have to live within their constraints. I said, physics informs us that we can't build a rocket that will travel faster than the speed of light. Only science fiction writers think that that's possible. We live within that world. The speed of light is an upper limit. We live in a world in which the laws of gravity tell us you cannot build an anti-gravity machine here on Earth. And the first and second laws of thermodynamics dictate that we cannot build a perpetual motion machine. Those are laws of nature. No one says we've got to beat them or change them. We live within them. In chemistry, it's the same. The atomic properties of the elements, diffusion constants, reaction rates, these all dictate the kinds of chemical reactions we can carry out, the kinds of molecules that we can synthesize, and we have to live within the laws of chemistry to carry out our activities. And in biology, it's the same. Every species of plant and animal has a maximum number that can be sustained indefinitely that is defined by what's called the carrying capacity of an ecosystem or a habitat. So that the carrying capacity tells you if you go beyond a certain number, you're then going to crash because the ecosystem or habitat can't sustain it. Well, humans are not confined to a single ecosystem. We use our brains and adapt ourselves and our surroundings, and we learn to live in many, many different ecosystems, from the high Arctic through deserts to tropical rainforests to mountainsides and wetlands and grasslands. We are very, very adaptive to our surroundings, and we're not confined to specific ecosystems or habitats. But our home is the biosphere, the zone of air, water, and land where all life exists. That's where we live. And the biosphere is finite, and there is a certain number of our species that can be sustained within that biosphere. Now, of course, our impact in the biosphere is determined by two things. One is the number of us, but the other is how much we use per person. And I think scientists overwhelmingly agree. Our species has long exceeded, regardless of how much collectively we're all using, we are exceeding the carrying capacity of the biosphere. There are simply far too many of us, and the only thing that we can do to protect something within the biosphere for a future is for us in the industrialized countries to radically reduce our consumption and reduce the size of our economies. Whenever I say that, we've got to degrow our economies, people get very, very excited, and they say, oh, do you want us to go back living in caves? Do we have to grow our own food and make our own clothes? No. That's not what we say at all. How about going back to 1950? We had telephones, we had cars, we had refrigerators. Life was good. What the hell, we think that we need all this stuff. We never ask the question, how much is enough? Are we happier with all this stuff? Why are we working harder and harder, and yet we're going backwards? We're far beyond the capacity, the carrying capacity of the biosphere. And then the biology dictates that we are all animals. And I said this years ago. I was in Austin, Texas. Huge audience, way bigger than this audience here. A lot of children were in the front rows, and I said, now kids, if you remember one thing from my speech, remember we are animals. Man, did their parents get pissed off at me. Don't you call my daughter an animal, we're human beings. And my response was, if you don't think you're an animal, are you a plant? We are animals. And as biological creatures, biology dictates that we have some fundamental needs. So I asked the CEO, I said, Mr. CEO, what do you think is the most fundamental need every human being on earth has? And I stumped him. I could see he was thinking, a job? Is it money? I said, look, if you don't have air for 3 minutes, you're dead. If you have to breathe contaminated air, you're sick. So can you agree with me? Clean air, protecting clean air has to be the highest priority of every society in the world. And then I said, you and I were 60 to 70% water by weight. We're just basically a big blob of water with enough organic thickener added, we don't dribble away on the floor. But you know, the body leaks water, right? It comes out of our skin and our eyes and our mouth and our crotch, and we lose water, so we have to top up with water. If you don't have water for 4 to 6 days, you're dead. If you have to drink polluted water, you're sick. So, Mr. CEO, can you put water along with clean air, clean water as a fundamental high priority need? And then I said, well, a lot of us can go for quite a while without food, but 4 to 6 weeks without food, you're dead. If you have to eat polluted food, you're sick. Most of our food comes from the soil. So can we put food and soil up with clean air and clean water? And then I said, all of the energy in our bodies that we need to move and grow and reproduce, all of that energy is sunlight. Sunlight captured by plants through photosynthesis, converted into chemical energy, and then we get it by eating the plants or the animals that eat the plants, and we store the energy in our bodies. And when we need that energy, we burn the molecules and liberate the energy of the sun back out into our bodies. So can we put photosynthesis along with those other elements? Would you not agree with me, I asked him, that clean air, clean water, clean soil and food, and photosynthesis are fundamental needs for every human being on Earth? And then I said, the miracle of life on Earth is that those 4 elements that indigenous people around the world refer to as the 4 sacred elements, earth, air, fire, and water, those elements are replenished, are cleansed, are created by the web of living things. It's all of the green things in the oceans and on land that are taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting oxygen back in it. Without plants, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. They create the very air that we depend on. It's all of the plant roots and soil fungi and bacteria that filter water as it percolates through the soil in the hydrologic cycle, and we're able to drink it. It's all life. All of our food was once alive, and most of it grew in the soil, and that soil is created by life. I'm sure many of you have read or seen the movie The Martian, you know, where Matt Damon was stranded on Mars and he had to stretch his potatoes out to live for years longer so that he can wait for his rescue. There's lots of sand and dust and gravel on Mars, but guess what? There's no soil. Soil is created by life. And if you saw the movie, you know, in order to grow his potatoes, he had to dig a hole in the sand, put human poop into the sand before he could grow the potatoes. And this is why the whole idea of terraforming Mars is such a stupid idea. We think we're going to transform a planet that has no atmosphere and no oxygen in it, that has no life in it and no soil. I mean, come on, give me a break. Anyway, I was asked that question today by someone that called in. So life, and life of course captures all of that energy through photosynthesis. And I said, Mr. CEO, you know that your business is based on photosynthesis. Fossil fuels are simply the energy captured by plants in photosynthesis. Coal, oil, gas. And then think of the fuel we use today, wood, peat, and dung. These are all forms of life that capture sunlight. So the web of living things is responsible for delivering us the 4 sacred elements, earth, air, fire, and water. So I said to Mr. CEO, could you, at least as a human being, shake hands with me and agree those are the fundamental needs, and that however we live, we have to ensure that we protect earth, air, fire, and water, and biodiversity? He wouldn't shake hands with me. He wasn't angry. I think he was disappointed and very, very sad. And he left, and I never heard from him again. And I know it was unfair of me to do that, because he had come down as the CEO of a company, an oil company, to negotiate. If he were to go back to his shareholders and say, I had a discussion with Suzuki and I agree with him, clean air, clean water, clean soil, these are things that we can't mess with. Whatever we do as an oil company, we can't mess with those things. He'd get fired in a flash. That is not his job. And so this is a challenge, I believe, is that we live in a world that is shaped and constrained by laws of nature. But we have become a species that think we're so clever, we invent things that are more important than those dictates of laws of nature. My Prime Minister, thank God he's gone, for 10 years, Stephen Harper, said, we can't do anything about climate change, it'll destroy the economy. So he elevates the economy above the very atmosphere that sustains us. This is madness. We see at the COP meetings, COP21, 196 countries all negotiating about the climate, about the atmosphere that belongs to no one. But through the lenses of 196 national borders, thank goodness COP21 was very, very, to me, groundbreaking and successful. But it's absurd for countries to come there and act as if their national boundaries, air doesn't stay within national borders. I've been arguing with Albertans for years. I say, I don't care what you do with the tar sands, dig it up, burn it, do whatever you want, as long as whatever you do doesn't or stays within Alberta. Because I don't want to live with the mess that you're creating. Well, of course, that's not the way the world works. So national boundaries are meaningless in terms of the natural world. We create ideas like capitalism and communism and the economy and markets and corporations. These are not forces of nature. We invented them. Why is it we try to shoehorn nature into our inventions, try to make nature fit our economic needs, try to make nature fit into our borders and so on? Nature can't do that. But these are human creations. We invented them. We can change them. It's really absurd the way you hear neoconservatives talk about, if you say the market, well, the market, hallelujah, bow down before the market, free the market, let the market do its thing. What the hell? We invented it. And if it's not working, we can change it. We can't change nature. So this is the challenge. I believe we have to be much more humble, that we have to learn the lessons, thank goodness, Indigenous people still cling to and are willing to share with us about our place on earth. And let us then turn what is a very serious crisis into an opportunity. And all it takes is to look at the world through different lenses. So let's get going now. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I realize now that I was aiming at 7 o'clock, but I started 15 minutes after 6, so I'm going to take a little advantage. The decision was made not to try to take questions from the audience because it was so unwieldy, but a number of questions did come in beforehand, and I will try to respond to a few of them. But before I do, I wanted to read something that I'm very proud of the David Suzuki Foundation. Before the Earth Summit in Rio, we spent a lot of time crafting a declaration which we felt put human beings in the proper perspective. So it's called a Declaration of Interdependence. And Tara was the main contributor to this, but we had input from Indigenous people as well as Raffi, a children's singer, and Wade Davis, an anthropologist. So this is the declaration. This we know. We are the earth through the plants and animals that nourish us. We are the rains and the oceans that flow through our veins. We are the breath of the forests of the land and the plants of the sea. We are human animals, related to all other life as descendants of the firstborn cell. We share with these kin a common history written in our genes. We share a common present filled with uncertainty. And we share a common future as yet untold. We humans are but one of 30 million species, weaving the thin layer of life enveloping the world. The stability of communities of living things depends upon their diversity. Linked in that web, we are interconnected, using, cleansing, sharing, and replenishing the fundamental elements of life. Our home planet Earth is finite. All life shares its resources and the energy from the sun, and therefore has limits to growth. For the first time, we have touched those limits. When we compromise the air, the water, the soil, and the variety of life, we steal from the endless future to serve the fleeting present. This we believe. Humans have become so numerous and our tools so powerful that we have driven fellow creatures to extinction, dammed the great rivers, torn down ancient forests, poisoned the earth, rain, and wind, and ripped holes in the sky. Our science has brought pain as well as joy. Our comfort is paid for by the suffering of millions. We are learning from our mistakes. We are mourning our vanished kin, and we now build a new politics of hope. We respect and uphold the absolute need for clean air, water, and soil. We see that economic activities that benefit the few while shrinking the inheritance of many are wrong. And since environmental degradation erodes biological capital forever, full ecological and social cost must enter all equations of development. We are one brief generation in the long march of time. The future is not ours to erase. So where knowledge is limited, we will remember all those who will walk after us and err on the side of caution. This we resolve. All this that we know and believe must now become the foundation of the way we live. At this turning point in our relationship with Earth, we work for an evolution from dominance to partnership, from fragmentation to connection, from insecurity to interdependence. This is a declaration. You can get it on our website. We also have a small booklet discussing what the implications are. But I believe that we need this kind of vision or perspective of our place on the planet to work towards a different future for our children. Now let me just, there were quite a few questions that came in. One of the first questions that came in, of course, was something that seems, at least the media I've talked to, seem concerned about. What about the future of nuclear energy here? And I gather there's going to be a big paper coming out from a Royal Commission in which the conclusion is that South Australia ought to accept nuclear wastes from other countries and dump them in the ground here. And the economic opportunities are there. I find it very curious that when you look at the map of the possible donors of this waste, Canada and the United States figure in that equation. And I'm wondering, Canada is the second largest country in the world. We can't find a place to deal with our own nuclear waste. So South Australians are going to say, great, just pay me and we'll take it. Yeah, we'll take it. You Canadians won't deal with it, so we'll take it. You're going to take it from the United... This strikes me as very, very weird. But if you're going to store it, it's a great political deal. The chances of something happening catastrophically within the next 100 years, very, very unlikely. So hell yes. Let's bring it on. We're going to make money and not pay any consequences. But wait a minute now. This stuff's going to have to be in the ground for what? Over 100,000 years? How long has Australia as a country existed, as a national entity? 100,000, and you've been around, what, less than 200 years? Over 100,000 years, imagine the plate tectonic activity, imagine the sea level rise and all of the changes in climate from global warming. Do we think we have any idea what those safe deposits are going to be like in another 10,000 or 50,000 years? I think it's crazy to say, basically, we don't care about future generations. That's their problem. We're dealing with what we need right now. I personally would be offended to think that my place, my home, was just going to be a dump for other countries. But so there are many of the question I'm looking at now is, well, is it too late? And there are many of my colleagues, indeed, who are saying we passed too many tipping points and there's really nothing we can do. And my answer to that is, look, your message of urgency, and I said this to Clive a couple of years ago when I met him in Melbourne, to Clive Hamilton. I said, look, your message of urgency is very, very strong. But for heaven's sakes, stop saying it's too late. The minute you say it's too late, it absolutely deflates you. What's the point of doing anything if it's too late? Go out and murder, rape, steal, it doesn't matter, it's too late. I mean, that's ridiculous. But there's a more fundamental reason why you can't say it's too late. We don't know enough to say it's too late. I mean, that's absurd. We've got ourselves into a mess. We can describe what some of the mess is and what possible consequences will be, but we don't know with certainty that it's too late. And I base it for my personal experience that I believe our ignorance is still great. The most prized species of salmon in the world is called the sockeye salmon. Sockeyes have that bright red flesh that's fatty, it tastes wonderful. Sockeye is the most prized fish in the world, and the biggest run of sockeye salmon is in Canada, in the Fraser River in British Columbia. Now, before contact with Europeans, archaeologists tell us that there may have been between 100 and 120 million sockeye running in a year, which is an unbelievable number. We came along and did all kinds of things like blow up mountains and have landslides that block the river and so on. And now 20 to 30 million sockeye is a good run. In 2009, we got just over 1 million sockeye returning to the Fraser. And I remember turning to Tara and saying, that's it. There isn't enough biomass to get those animals up into the spawning beds. They've had it. They're going to go extinct. 1 year later, in 2010, we got the biggest run of sockeye salmon in 100 years. Now, I use this story not to show how stupid I am. Nobody has a clue what the hell happened. And I believe it's just a classic example of our ignorance. And we have no right to say we know enough to say it's too late. I believe if we can pull back and give nature a chance, she will surprise us in so many ways. But it's very urgent that we pull back now. So that's my answer. You can't ever say it's too late. And we have to have hope that we don't know enough. That's the last question I'll deal with is, Well, then what gives you hope? Being ignorant is one way of giving me hope, but I'm motivated very much as an elder now, being a grandfather. And I look at young people coming along, and they didn't ask to be born into this kind of world. Throughout time, every generation hoped to leave the world a better place for their children, with more opportunities, better opportunities. You know with absolute certainty that the world you all knew as children is not going to be there for your children or your grandchildren. And so it seems to me that we have a huge responsibility there. I'm one person, and I'm not so vain to think that I'm so important, I'm going to be able to make a huge difference. But if there are millions and millions of people all doing their part, I believe we can make a big difference. And what motivates me is that now that I am in the death zone, I hope that I die at home. I'm not suffering a lot. And I hope that my grandchildren will be around me so that I can look each of them in the eye and say, I'm just one man, but I did the best I could. And that's all anybody can do. But we've all got that responsibility, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your truly insightful, compassionate and extremely passionate lecture tonight, especially for the Hawke Centre and the University of South Australia. You have been an environmental shining light for many of us, not only here in Australia but globally, and I believe this will continue well into the future because there will be one. We have to make sure of it. As part of David's visit to South Australia, he will also be speaking at Warm Adelaide's The Planet Talks this Saturday, the 12th of March. David's keynote address will be at 2 p.m, and at 4 p.m, he will be part of a panel discussion titled, What's Love Got to Do With It?, hosted by the wonderful Robin Williams. The Planet Talks series is also presented by the University of South Australia and is a terrific way to engage with live conversations about our environment and the much-needed care for our planet, and the perfect way to spend your long weekend in the gorgeous Botanic Park. A reminder that a podcast and video of tonight's lecture will be available next week on the Hawke Centre website, and don't forget to grab a copy of David's latest book, Letters to My Grandchildren, which is available in the foyer as you leave tonight. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for what was a stunning way to begin the university's 25th birthday celebrations. And of course, to hear from this much-loved environmental leader and elder. Thank you.